Before you tonight, we have a legislative code amendment to amend Title IV, Chapter 3, and that's essentially to allow more residential uses within commercial zoning districts within the city. So just to give you a little bit of background, over the years, Community Development Department has received numerous inquiries regarding residential uses within commercial zones. We also had a 2013 council goal, which was to expand the perceived downtown area on Main Street from East Street to the South Couplet, and that was through construction of streetscape improvements, as well as the evaluation of zoning and development standards within that corridor. And so the predominant zone is the motor business zone within that area. And we had taken a look at that, and really a zone change to a different designation was going to create too many nonconformities, especially for some of the significant investment that had happened in the area, Cenex, as well as Han Rental. And so we thought that another maybe proposed amendment to the motor business zone would be appropriate in that circumstance, and that was to allow more residential uses. And so as part of this, we had researched 4 other municipalities. We had looked at Lewiston, Pullman, Coeur d'Alene, Missoula. We also reviewed other city commercial zoning districts which would, or could potentially allow additional residential opportunities within those zones. And we had identified basically 4 zoning districts that could include more residential activity: neighborhood business, general business, motor business, as well as the industrial zoning district. And so looking at the proposed amendment before you tonight within the neighborhood business zoning district, basically we would be adding under the permitted principal uses and structures. The language that currently exists is it allows residential uses, including residential rental unit, provided that any dwelling located on the ground floor shall be located behind commercial uses in a manner that would not interrupt commercial frontage. And then we had included a proposed part basically to stay on the primary street except as otherwise authorized herein. Residential uses may be allowed on the ground floor on secondary street frontage of corner lots. And so the idea here is that you typically have a primary street, especially in a neighborhood business zone, maybe 6th Street. You have corner lots that are adjacent to 6th Street, and they may be adjacent to another neighborhood street, which is predominantly residential. And this is something to allow, those residential uses to be on the ground floor, since it is transitioning from the commercial frontage on a primary street to this sedentary street that's more residential. And so that's really the thought behind that amendment. Also wanted to provide the opportunity to have residential uses on the ground floor which are not located behind commercial uses through a conditional use permit. And so that would be reviewed by the Board of Adjustment where appropriate. Looking at the general business zone, essentially we would create the same language that we had carried over from the neighborhood business zoning district. As long as they're not located on the ground floor, that would interrupt commercial frontage. We'd also include the provision in there that if it's located on the ground floor of a secondary street frontage on corner lots, then residential uses would be permitted in that circumstance. Looking at accessory uses and structures, we would eliminate the current language that exists under the general business zone that states that one dwelling, attached or detached, when such dwelling is customarily incidental to principal use and is located on the same principal use. Same lot as the principal use, excuse me. Dwelling within a motel or hotel, or a dwelling for a caretaker or watchman employed on the premises are examples of acceptable dwellings under this provision. And so with the inclusion of allowed residential uses within permitted principal uses, we would not need this section anymore that basically allows one dwelling. Conditional uses, we would also include, right now it's the way you achieve residential uses within general business is through a conditional use permit process. So shifting those over to principally permitted, basically we would just amend this portion and residential uses that are located on the ground floor would be through a conditional use permit. Looking at the motor business zone, once again, essentially carrying over the same language as the previous neighborhood business, as well as general business. striking the language that has one dwelling for a caretaker or watchman. And the issue we run into with that current provision is that right now it's arguable really when you need a caretaker or watchman on the premises. So obviously they provide two examples, motel or hotel, where you'd need somebody to check people in, as they're coming in the odd hours of the night. There'd also be, maybe another example of a veterinary clinic where you'd need somebody there in an apartment to check on animals in the middle of the night. Really, it's arguable that the big one we get is maybe a contractor's yard where they're storing equipment and they need somebody on site in order to be a watchman for that equipment. And so just really simplifying that, mainly in the industrial zoning district, but that's just one of the challenges we run into with the current provision that talks about a watchman or caretaker employed on premise. Looking at conditional uses, once again, this would be allow residential uses on the ground floor so long as they go through a conditional use permit process. Brings us to the industrial zoning district, looking at permitted accessory uses and structures, and these are accessory uses. Basically bringing the current language of business offices incident to any permitted uses provided is located on the same site as the principal building, and also adding a portion under accessory uses to allow one dwelling unit per lot where accessory to a permitted principal use. And previously, a conditional use was a dwelling for a caretaker or watchman employed on premise. So basically just allowing that by right, just one dwelling, and striking the conditional use permit in order to achieve that. Planning and Zoning Commission did conduct a public hearing on October 22nd, and at which time the Commission unanimously recommended approval to City Council. Staff's recommendation before you tonight is to conduct a public hearing and, upon consideration of testimony received, approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and then it be read by title and published by summary. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have about this.
Questions for Michael before I open it up to public testimony? Dan?
Let's look at some possible examples. Say, Walgreens. I mean, if they wanted to have a they would be allowed to have a residential use there. Or say, I'm just trying to pick, several different types of things. Or like the offices out there at Alturas, what's another one that's completely different, like a car dealership or something like that? Would those 3 types of businesses be able to take advantage of this code change?
As long as they were in the appropriate zone with these proposed changes. Typically right now in the motor business zone, they'd have to go through the plan unit development process, and that's a public hearing. A little substantial investment in elevation, building elevations, site plan, floor plans, and then, really no knowledge of whether it was going to be approved or denied when you got to that public hearing process level. And so right now it'd be similar to Anytime Fitness, right? Right next to Walgreens, they had to go through a PUD in order to achieve the 8 apartments that they had constructed on top when they did the remodel from the old Sandpiper. And so this would be allowing that by right, in order, instead of having to go through that kind of unpredictable process of a public hearing to achieve something that really we want.
So that's the perfect example right there, basically.
Yeah, that's a wonderful use. Wayne had a...
Well, and that was exactly what the example I was going to bring up is when the owner bought that property and he had to jump through a lot of hoops, get a PUD cleared, and now that could be done by right if this is passed.
Walter?
Mike, Dan brought up Alturas. Alturas is an RTO zone, right?
Correct.
Are you proposing this change for RTO zones?
No.
I don't think that RTO was included, was it?
Okay, so...
No, it's neighborhood business, motor business, general business, and industrial.
when you mentioned Alturas, that's not included?
That would not be included.
Okay.
Art, you had...
That was exactly what I was going to ask.
Okay, all right. Any other questions for Mike before I open the public hearing? Thank you, Mike. We will open the public hearing right now, and I would take testimony for anybody that is in favor. You can come up and state your name and address and let us know what's on your mind. Seeing nobody rush to the podium, I will open testimony for general testimony or opposed to this. If somebody would like to come forward, they may. This is making it awful easy on these guys up here, everybody, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'll turn it over to Council Wayne.
I'm really glad to see this come through. We looked at it in admin and kind of picked it apart just a little bit. It's the same. We made no recommendations other than to move it forward, and this is a real common sense change to Title IV. I really like it, and I think it'll be bring some very positive things to the business areas. So, without further ado, I'm going to make a motion to approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings to be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Okay, Wayne made a motion to approve the ordinance under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, then it be read by title and published by summary, and John Weber seconded that motion. I will start the roll with Art. Aye.
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 And let it be known it was gone by unanimous. Thank you very much.